welcome to this art video. This is Mr. Aguilar, your art teacher. So today I'm going to go over how to draw a grid portrait. So I have some grids set up digitally, 8x10 and at 16x20, which is double the size. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the desktop and we're going to draw a grid by hand. The grid portrait method is the easiest method to draw straightforward portraits. And then I'm going to show you how you can adapt and twist that into something that's a little bit more artistic. So the only thing about this is it does take some prep time, but if you prep it once, you can use your same grids over and over again. You just want to make sure that you save them. So we're going to go over to the table right now, and we're going to draw a grid by hand. Let's get started with this, okay? So what I have here is I have a 8.5 by 11 paper and a ruler. So half of 8.5 is going to be 4 1/4. So I'm just going to go over and measure 4 1/4 inches. And then I'm going to do it again down here and measure 4 1/4 inches. If you want to draw a straight line going up and down or horizontally at the same angle, so in this case a 90-degree angle, you need to have 2 tick marks. So tick marks are just measurement marks. You probably can't see them because they're super small, but I have them right here. And then I just line up my ruler and I'm going to draw my grid. So if you don't do the 2 tick marks, you risk being crooked when you start drawing your grid. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the paper 180 degrees, so now I'm looking at it widthwise. And this is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, so half of 11 is going to be 5.5. So what I want to do is I want to make, again, 2 tick marks. So I'm going to go down to 5.5 and make a mark. I will come down here. I will make a mark at 5.5. So I have my 2 tick marks. If you want to do a third one for good measure, you can. 5.5. And I often say my numbers out loud, so I don't forget what I'm doing and I don't forget my measurements. It's just another way to kind of double check. And I'm going to draw my grid right there. So again, now I have a grid that's centered on my paper, and my grid's going to be a 1-inch grid. So I'm just going to make some measurements. I like making my measurements right on my line because it's easy, so I line it up. It doesn't matter where you line your ruler up as long as you're on an inch marker. So again, just going to do that, shift it over, and I'm going to put the tick mark at every inch. So you should have a 1/4 of an inch on each side. 1/4 inch equals a 1/2 inch. So that's where the 1/2 and 8.5 comes in. Then I'll come up here, and again, it doesn't matter as long as you line up on an inch marker. And I'm going to put my measurement marks in every inch. And you want to make sure that you're being accurate with this. And this is the prep time that I'm talking about. So the other thing I like to do is I like to have my lines in front of me. So I want to make sure that I'm not crooked or do anything wonky. So I want to have that line in front of me. So I just rotate my paper and then I just connect the dots. So again, I'm lining up my tick marks, and again, a tick mark is a measurement mark. They're called tick marks because they're tiny little marks. But when I get towards the end, I'm going to have to flip it over. But it's fine because that paper is going to let me know. So I'm going to know if I'm crooked if my paper's like this. So I line up my marker, and then I draw my line. And that's how we start off our grid. Now I'm going to do the other side. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to speed up the film and just do the rest of the grid. Okay, so now that I'm done with my grid, I do have a couple of options of how I can use this. If I were going to draw a grid on my final paper, I have to do it super light, and then I'd have to go through and erase it piece by piece, which isn't something you necessarily want to do. If you do this in ink or make your pencil marks dark enough, you can simply place a clean paper over the top, and you'll be able to see your grid through the paper. You could also use a light table and place your paper on top of the light table and use the grid this way. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. Also, they do have some cheap art boards on Amazon that you can buy. They're about $14. They work really, really well, and I have mine out so I can grab it real fast to show you. These ones run about 120 bucks, so they're pretty pricey. If you're doing a lot of art, a light table is worth it. So let me show you the one that you can buy, and these are just called art boards or light boards. And I bought a case for mine, and again, they're thin, they're tiny, they're really easy. They have just a simple power up button, and they're USB charged, and you just put the USB charger in there. And it comes with this charger. You can plug it into a laptop, you can plug it into a wall, and again, it's just this little black cable, and it's your old standard USB cable. So those run anywhere from $14 to $18 depending on how big you want to get it, and they'll go from slightly bigger than 8.5 by 11 all the way to I want to say like 18 inches by 30 something inches. So again, you can find those on Amazon if you want. And so you might ask, what's the point of doing a grid if you can just use a light table? Well, we're not trying to learn how to trace. And I'm sorry if you didn't get all of that because my microphone was over here. We're not trying how to trace. What we're trying to do is learn how to use the grid to accurately draw a portrait. Okay, so when you actually do this, you can put a grid on the picture that you're going to use. And then what you're doing is you're kind of just matching up certain points on that grid to the face. So you're looking for landmarks or easily identifiable areas that you can see. And let me zoom in on it so you guys can see it. Okay, so when you're doing this, you'll look at this grid for instance. You're just going to draw the part of the nose that you see, and you can actually measure down across or down and accurately put a point down for where that nose is going to be. Same thing with the mouth, and you can almost like connect the dots with this. This is the simplest method. Now, the one thing that this will help you with is training your eye. So if you do a grid portrait enough, you'll eventually train your eye and your hand-eye coordination, and you should be able to eventually freehand a portrait without the grid because your eyes are going to be used to measuring things visually versus needing the grid. But this is how I usually start all my beginning art students. Again, when you get into more advanced art or you want to do more advanced art for yourself, that's when you really start practicing freehand and understand it's going to come with a lot of frustration. Now, if I go big, okay, I already know I can draw. If I go big, I'm not going to necessarily always freehand. A lot of times I will use the grid method. And what I'll do is I'll project a grid, or I'll make a large grid on a tracing paper, and then I'll use that to draw my portrait. So I might take something that's at an 8 by 10 and then double it at a 16 by 20. So basically my 1-inch grid becomes a 2-inch grid, or my 1-inch grid becomes a 3-inch grid. So I'm drawing it 3 times bigger. That is the easiest way to go large and stay accurate. When you go murals, a lot of artists will use the grid method to do murals because There's no way to gauge how accurate you are when you're standing up close to a wall and you're doing something that's really, really big, like 10 feet by 16 feet. So this is the grid, and then I'm going to keep adding to this video, and we're going to do a portrait. Alright, so I'm going to do this on tracing paper, just for the video so we can see the grid. There's a couple of things that you can do. One, you can do a grid far lighter than what I drew. Again, I drew it dark for the camera. Do your base drawing all your major lines onto the grid, and then you can take that drawing to a light table and trace it cleanly on the finished board. So you can set up the grid, do the drawing on regular white paper. You can get a nicer, thicker art paper, and then trace your drawing onto that paper. Now, you might ask, well, why don't I just trace the actual photograph? Well, that's really not going to do anything for you as far as training your eye, hand-eye coordination, and practice. So this right here is really building up skill set. So you don't want to take the easiest way out, which is simply tracing a photograph and then shading on top of it. So those are the options that I would do. The other thing you can do is if you're going to ink this or do it in watercolor or mixed media like ink and watercolor, you can then transfer your drawing, your actual sketch that you did by hand, to that watercolor paper and complete your illustration that way. So we're going to get started. I will speed up the film as I'm going on, so we just don't watch me drawing for however long this takes, okay? So to begin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a landmark. I'm going to find an area that's easy to identify. I'm going to draw that first, and that's going to set my foundation. The other thing, don't forget to count. So you can count boxes. So if you start over here, you want to make sure that that eye is in the second column, the nose is in the third column and part of the second column, and then the other eye is in that third column. So you want to make sure you count. This way you don't actually draw something too wide, and that's really the last tip I'm going to give before I start this. Okay, so again, if you start over here, let's say this is the outside of the face. Okay, so you're going to get part of the eye here, part of the eye there. You'll get the nose, and then you'll get the other eye. So you want to make sure that you do count, so you don't lose track. And what I'm going to do is I'm really just going to start here, and I'm going to go with the top of the face. So I know from that eye, I got 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes up to the top of the hair. So I can say I want this to be the top of the hair in this column. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I want to make sure that I start the drawing down here, and then I look over and I see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes wide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes wide. So I can comfortably start right in this box, and that makes sure I have enough room for my drawing. So let's begin. Okay, so now I have the face laid out, so I'm going to stop here. At this point, you really can't shade too much. You can see what happens when you start to try to shade and stuff. Um, I was mapping out the hair, so the highlights, shadows, so that will look nicer on a pencil drawing, but I was just trying to figure out the shapes, and then once you start erasing, it starts smudging, so it's better to leave it. What I would do is, now that I have it drawn out, I can do a bunch of different things. I can transfer it to a nice drawing paper and do all the shading and rendering. I can transfer it to a Bristol board and do an ink portrait drawing. I could transfer it to a watercolor paper and do a nice watercolor portrait. So I have a bunch of options. So this is why it's good to use the grid method. Start practicing hand-eye coordination. You will make mistakes. You will look for things. Let me highlight this real fast so you guys can see it. And one of the things that you really want to look for is like the curves on the face. And that's going to be actually the harder part, because you can measure, you can go in and measure on the picture and see, okay, this is where that thing is and this is where that part is when you're working with the grid method. Now, this is the foundation. This is the beginning. This is the liner. From this point, you're going to go on to your next phases. So that would be, if you're going to do pencil drawing, rendering it, right? If you're going to do an ink drawing, how are you going to ink it? So usually what I would do, if I wanted to make this an ink illustration, I would actually finish it in pencil on a piece of paper. I would shade in all my values, and then I would use that as my guide for when I'm putting my ink lines in. So a lot of pictures that you might see with, like, how do they do that scribble effect to get that eye, or how do they get that splatter effect, or how do they get those lines exactly precise when they were inking? It's because they're working on top of a drawing that's already been rendered. So those are the next couple of phases. Another video I'll come out with is how to render hair. There's a technique called push and pull. So I can get in that. So perhaps what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take this drawing, I'm going to transfer it to an illustration paper, and then I'm going to use it for a couple of demonstration techniques with shading. So till next time, this is Mr. Aguilar, your art teacher. Have a good day.